about the government flight manuals that say like, oh, assume a stationary, flat, non-rotating Earth. I think I've given my response on that is that when I look at lots of educational materials and training manuals, like there's lots of things that they're basically saying neglect. Like it's very often that when studying things we'll start off by saying assume there's no air resistance, assume there's no friction, because those are complicating factors, and no one reading that would take it to mean that like air doesn't exist at all, that friction doesn't exist at all. So like I definitely would need to see on an individual basis if these training documents are sounding like they're literally claiming that in reality there is no such thing as curvature or spin, or they're just saying that kind of for these purposes of what you're being trained with, you do not have to worry about that at this time. Now, another thing I want to get in is that because I am not a pilot and I do not really understand a lot of the dynamics of the atmosphere, I don't have a very good intuition for like what a pilot flying over the Earth is expecting to see. I
Okay.
wouldn't expect them to just see the ground rushing below because the air is also rushing around as well and sweeping the plane back and forth, and I don't
Yeah.
really know how to track all those different forms of motion. What I
Okay.
would say is that I would 100 million% expect to see someone in a rocket leaving the atmosphere to look down and see the Earth spinning, because they're now out of any effects of the atmosphere on them. So if an astronaut is saying that you cannot see Earth rotation from the position of a rocket out of the atmosphere, then I would say, okay, wow, I don't know then how to reconcile that with the claim that the Earth is spinning. That would be powerful evidence that the Earth is not spinning.
Okay. I would like to respond to your first point, but first I'll leave the mic open to Eden because you were addressing.
What a gentleman. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for the feedback. Yes, I totally agree. I will retract. I'm not actually, um, I haven't actually gone over those documents in a while, but what I will do, I'll take them because I think I do have access to them still. I'll post them and I'll take them in the chat for you, Zizi. And but if I am incorrect, yeah, I would definitely retract or concede for sure. And yeah, go ahead. Thanks. I was going to drop something else for the chat to look at. Go ahead, Amphibious. Thank you so much.
Yep. Yep. Good to see you sort of change your name. Maybe it's still Crizzle influence, but that remains to be seen. Um, yeah, just the first point was, you know, some manuals they say disregard whatever molecules you were talking about that you use in that example, right? But the and that doesn't equate for that those molecules to not exist. The difference, though, the reason it's not apples to apples, like you tried to make it seem to be, is because like the Earth requires so flying would require you to follow that curve. Just because you can disregard the spin of the Earth and the curvature, you treat it like flat and motionless. In that it still doesn't. I'm not making this point very
Well,
well.
let me clarify perhaps what I meant for the case of a pilot. I would assume that those documents, if they're saying you can disregard the curve and you can disregard the spin, are talking about short flights in which those effects are not going to be significant. I absolutely would agree that if the Earth is curved and spinning, at a certain point over a long enough flight, those facts are going to become significant. Now, what I don't know is how a pilot is trained to think about it. Because the thing is that the pilot's not in direct interaction with the ground, they're in direct interaction with the air. So the effects of the ground curving and spinning, the effect of the ground being spherical and spinning and being in interaction with the atmosphere, whatever those effects are, they're going to be sort of mediated through the atmosphere to the pilot, right? The pilot's not feeling the
Mm,
ground spinning below them, but the ground spinning below them supposedly has some effect on the atmosphere, and the pilot is feeling the wind speed of the atmosphere against them. So I don't know if a pilot in their head is thinking moment by moment, like, what's the curve of the Earth? What's the spin of the Earth? I would imagine in their head, they're thinking in terms of, like, what's the wind speed relative to the plane? What's the tilt of the plane? What's our altitude? And by controlling for all of that, they are controlling for the effects of the ground curving and spinning on the atmosphere and that on the plane. I guess the only point I'm making there is that like the pilot may be dealing with factors in the air that a scientist would say, oh, that is being caused by the rotation of the Earth, but that doesn't mean that the pilot's job is to give like a university lecture about how the spin of the ground impacts the atmosphere the pilot's flying through. The
yeah.
pilot's job is to understand how to control the plane. And an analogy I would give is like a horse jockey in a horse race, their job is to control the animal in a high stress situation. Their job is not to be a know everything about the biology of a horse. Like if a
Okay.
horse jockey was interviewed and said something really wild, like, oh, I thought horses laid eggs, that would be really funny. You would hope that a horse jockey would know better than that, but it doesn't actually impact like their ability to do their job, which is much more about moment to moment responses to situations than kind of tracking the big picture of like the deeper science
Mhm.
reasons that these
Yeah.
things are coming up. But a
Yeah.
rocket's very different because it's out of
Okay.
the
Okay.
atmosphere.
Before you, yeah.
So that
Fair
was the
point.
point I wanted to make.
Fair,
Yeah.
fair point. I would just like to ask you, so would you agree that if a pilot of a Blackbird SR-71 um, doesn't have to take into account the spin and the curvature, there would be a problem there with the speed, the distance, and the time that those missions flew?
Yeah,
Right?
I was getting into a long sort of conversation about this, which was someone, which was basically that like, okay, so according to the spinning Earth model, the equator is going 1,000 miles per hour east, and the North Pole isn't. So if you fired a rocket from the North Pole and went due south straight to the equator, the rocket never banks east. Then by the time it's over the equator, the rocket should look down and see the equator moving 1,000 miles per east below them from their perspective. If they didn't do anything to turn east to keep up with the spin of the Earth below them. Um, and in principle, I would imagine that the pilots are also dealing with that to an extent, but then it gets more complicated in their case because there is the atmosphere itself that they're moving through, which is also going to be pushing them along and affecting their motion. So I just don't have as good of an intuition for like what a pilot's actually doing up there to manage the different airflows they're going through. So what things would look like to the pilot and like how a pilot would be trained to think and talk about things, which is why I think the astronaut case is a much cleaner example because it removes any confusions of language or technical terminology that might be very specific to like a pilot's training manual that's not necessarily how like a scientist or even an everyday person would talk about these things.
Can you separate the atmosphere and the wind for a minute? You just said the atmosphere would be pushing the plane along, right?
Yeah, I mean I mean if there's airflow compared to the plane, it's pushing on the plane. So if the plane is moving exactly at the same speed as the air around it, it's not going to feel a wind against it. If it is
So,
moving in any
so my
other way, it
question,
will.
I can expand on that. So, like, is the atmosphere, in your opinion, in lockstep with the rotation of the Earth at 400 meters per second ground speed at the equator?
No, definitely not as you go up higher, right? Because the even if the atmosphere near the surface of the Earth is being dragged pretty closely with the ground, as you get further and further up, it's a fluid, so it should be slipping behind. So I would expect that the atmosphere, the further up in altitude you go, is more and more out of sync in its motion compared to the ground below it. But I don't know the details or dynamics of how that transition occurs.
There's not supposed to be any drag or drift because the air gets thinner the higher you go up into the atmosphere. So you're not supposed to have any tangential effect at all, according to the gradient.
Well, we know, like, I mean, I've never been in a super high altitude plane. I've only ever been on commercial jets, and they're absolutely low enough within the atmosphere that any motion of the plane against the atmosphere that's not synchronized to the motion of the air around it is going to result in the plane feeling some strong flow of air against it from one side or the other that's going to move the plane around. I mean, we feel that with turbulence and crosswinds and stuff like that.
Well, if the air is moving in lockstep with the Earth, you should notice it if you were going in the opposite direction to the spin, right?
Okay, yeah, so this right, we're simplifying things now because I don't think that the air is in lockstep with the Earth. But let's just pretend for simplicity that it was. So if for simplicity that the air is in lockstep with the ground, then yeah, if you're flying west, you're gonna feel the air in your face. I mean, you're gonna feel the air in your face if you're moving. I mean, like I'm thinking about this in terms of like the ground-based weatherman might say there's 0 mile per hour wind today, but if I drive on the highway at 80 miles per hour and stick my hand out the window, I feel the air rushing by. So we're not really talking about the airspeed that's reported by the weatherman from a ground-based observatory that's measuring the wind to the ground. We're asking a different question, which is what is the airspeed to the plane, which is going to have a lot to do with the plane's motion through the air, how the plane is moving through the air.
I think you might need to brush up on a little bit of tangential fluid dynamics. Maybe Zanuck could help you on that. Someone that is very adamant that there's a lockstep with the atmosphere and the Earth.
Well, I don't know fluid dynamics well at all, but I would not possibly imagine that it could be completely lockstep. I could imagine that there is there is a significant drag of the atmosphere with the ground towards the east, like analogy of like a blender whipping up fluid within, your smoothie maker, and you see the fluid is flowing generally in the direction with the blades, but it's probably not keeping up with the blades perfectly. It's dragging behind the blades, but with some backward slippage from it. So I don't have any sense of what the extent of that is. But you would ask me if we did pretend, which I think is very unrealistic, that the atmosphere was moving in lockstep with the ground, then if you're flying over the ground, are you going to feel air rushing into your face? Yeah, for the same reason that, like, if there's no wind speed as reported by the weatherman on the ground, but you're on a motorcycle, you feel the air, blowing your hair back. So I think that's as much as I could say about it, of what we would expect, without getting into the details of the actual fluid dynamics of how much the atmosphere is being dragged by the Earth and how much the atmosphere is slipping behind the ground the further up in elevation you go.
Well, this is one of the biggest contentions in the flat Earth debate. Is the atmosphere is apparently in lockstep, and it works out fine. But there are people like I don't know if you've heard of our fellow. His name is New Perspective. He's got a very good argument that planes wouldn't be able to fly how they do if the Earth was rotating and had an atmosphere in lockstep, because the tangential forces that as the plane flies through the atmosphere would obviously offset like all of that, and just doesn't make sense over a rotating ball.
Oh yeah, I've been talking with New Perspective quite a bit, and we're in complete agreement that It doesn't make sense to say that the atmosphere is in lockstep with the ground, and I'm fairly surprised that people are making that argument. I don't know why they would make that argument. Again, I haven't studied it in detail, but that is definitely not my assumption here, that the
If you
atmosphere stays in lockstep.
So if you agree with him, you kind of pretty much saying, yeah, the Earth is not rotating.
No, I'm just saying that the atmosphere isn't in lockstep with the Earth. I mean, if you assumed that the Earth was rotating and assumed that the atmosphere stayed in lockstep with the Earth, that fails to match observation. He's going to draw from that the conclusion that the wrong thing that we assumed there was that the Earth is moving. My conclusion is that the wrong thing assumed there is this idea that the atmosphere would stay in lockstep with the Earth. So that was our point of disagreement on what is failing in these arguments being put forward. Like, I don't think that the atmosphere would stay in lockstep with the ground on a rotating Earth.
So can I just jump in here just for one sec? So what you're saying to me is intuitively obvious. That would make sense. I actually do work with fluids. I'm not a scientist, but I work with fluids. And I can't see for the life of me how the entire atmosphere would be in lockstep. So from your position, you would go along with the fact that if you could get in a helicopter and just go vertical and hover high enough, another country would eventually come underneath you, because the Earth
Yeah,
would.
I would 100% expect that if you were in a helicopter low to the ground, maybe the atmosphere low to the ground is moving with the ground enough that the
Yep,
helicopter stays over that position in the ground. But if the helicopter goes
yep,
high enough up, it should enter a part of the atmosphere that isn't staying with the ground, and
yep,
then the ground should rotate out below it. And from the perspective of someone on the ground, it would look like the helicopter got swept to the west.
yeah. So I agree but most won't. Most typical people in the Glober community that I've ever heard, and I've had I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 conversations like this. They will
Yeah.
say that no, the atmosphere will push the helicopter, and so if the helicopter goes up from Trump Tower in New York, it will just stay over Trump Tower in New York and you know
Forever.
travel around with the Earth, which I just think is ludicrous in that paradigm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Anyway,
don't.
thanks
I'm surprised that
for
people are saying
confirming.
that because I don't know. I wouldn't make that assumption at all. I mean, I don't really understand the dynamics of how much or how little the atmosphere does cling to the Earth by atmospheric friction effects. But it would have to be that at a certain point, if you got high enough, you would not still be surrounded by air that's traveling with the ground. So you would, from the perspective of someone on the ground, be left behind. And from the perspective on the ground, go to the west, and from the helicopter's perspective, it's now the ground is rolling ahead of them to the east. So I don't know I don't know at what height we would see that effect become significant is the issue. Um, but that's qualitatively speaking that if it were true that no matter how high up you go, at no point does the Earth rotate out from under the helicopter to the east, then I would agree there's no way that the Earth could be spinning. Or because I don't understand how the entire column of air arbitrarily far up could be staying in lockstep with the ground.
Exactly, and the argument that I put forward, and to me, I end up almost laughing in my head, was okay. If you had a swimming pool of water, a mile square, okay, a mile by a mile, and I'd say if you put a Bosch power drill into the center of that swimming pool, and with a normal 6 mil drill bit on it, and then just run the drill, do you think the entire swimming pool will eventually end up in a whirlpool at the same speed as the Bosch power drill bit going around? And true as I'm here, globers will say, yes, it will. It will eventually reach the speed of the 1200 RPM or whatever it is. And at that point, I just laugh. But that's the cognitive malaise that they're in because somebody said it, and it in their mind, oh, the friction will eventually catch up and the entire square mile will end up, given enough time, spinning at 1200 RPM. I've literally had a couple of those conversations in here. It's incredible.
Well,
You
I'm
need
definitely
14.
with you that I am fairly confident that it can't possibly be, without having gone through the math of it myself, just based on what I know about physics in general. I would never bet on that. I don't think that could. I seriously doubt that that would be the case, that a fluid would behave that way. Um, yeah. So
The difference is the drill bit in this analogy is not equivalent to the mass of the Earth and the atmosphere. This is not to scale. So you'd have to have a tiny little swimming pool with a giant drill bit.
No, their argument is it just needs enough time, because ultimately, every molecule is going to spin at the speed of the drill bit that's in contact with the drill bit, and it will then affect the one next to it and the one next to it. And if you give it enough time and the drill runs long enough, eventually it will all reach that speed. That's their. It's not my argument. That's their argument.
I mean, I feel like, I don't know, that I haven't looked into it in detail, but I don't think that's how fluids behave. I mean, there's friction within the fluid. There would definitely be an outward kind of propagation of the spin from near the drill bit outside, right? Like eventually there'd be some equilibrium that's reached where the fluid around the drill bit has been spun up to however fast it's going to spin. But I am picturing that the further out from the drill bit you go, the slower it's in rotation. I don't in any way
Well, that's
understand.
obvious.
Yeah.
That's obvious
Why?
when we look at
So
when we look at the sky, right? And we observe galaxies. The outside of a galaxy isn't spinning the same speed as the center of the galaxy, is it?
That's yeah. I mean, there's a whole other interesting topic about galaxies specifically, but we could even just stick to hurricanes and like whirlpools and stuff. It's like even if they are going for a long time, we know that they don't come into rigid lockstep with themselves. That the outer part is dragging behind at a much slower speed than the inner part.
Yeah.
So
As I say, I work with fluids, so I've got a mixing tank that's maybe 5 feet or 4.5 feet across, and I have if I've got a mixing propeller in there that's spinning at 1200 RPM, the fluid in the tank it barely gets above 15 RPM, 20 RPM probably. If there's 1,000 liters in the tank, so that's why like when people say that the drill bit will eventually get this a mile square swimming pool spinning at 1200 RPM, it's literally hilarious to me. I can leave my tank running for 6 hours, and like you said, it eventually reaches a point of equilibrium where it just spins consistently. So the notion that they will just dogmatically attest to it will do it when they have no real world experience in the area it's just like I said, it's literally funny to me.
yeah, well, I was chatting with New Perspective, and he said to me, not that we agree on conclusions at all, but it was a very interesting conversation about this stuff, that he appreciated that I'm not, quote, anti-flat Earth, and that's true. Like, I think it's more likely than not that the consensus is correct on the shape of the Earth, but there's nothing like offensive to me that people would want to go back and re-explore and turn over stones here and re-question these things. And I have never accused the flatter side of being intellectually lazy. Now, I do see that there are non-scientific reasons that motivate a lot of flat earthers. Like, I do observe that for a lot of flat earthers, there is a religious component to it. Like, I do not believe, for anyone for whom they have a religious component to this, that I would be able to convince them that the world is a sphere by scientific arguments. I think if they ever changed their mind on it, it would have to be because someone who is a fellow member of the faith convince them that scriptures were more in line with saying that the world is sphere than the world is flat. So there's definitely like philosophical motivations that I, as a non-religious person, am just not even on the same wavelength on within all of this, that I think clearly are playing an influence in people's thinking about this in a way they're very open about. But when it actually comes to like the scientific discussions of like, how do fluids behave? How does the refraction of light behave? I've never accused the flat earther side of just being lazy and not taking these things seriously and studying the properties of them and trying to think through what the different consequences would be.
I mean, there's nothing to talk about which way the light's bending because no one's ever measured it. So,
Refraction?
well, there's more things that can bend light other than refraction. So, if we're talking about something in the long distance in the atmosphere, that's never actually been measured, which way the light's bending.
Well, I don't know
Even
much
in your
about
own,
that subject at all, but I hear you guys debating
even
a
in your own
lot about
model,
refraction, and I don't know much about refraction.
I
Yeah,
know, ZZ, even in your own model, you have something other than refraction that's bending light.
gravity. I'm not sure what you're referring to exactly.
Yes, I'm not saying that's what it is because that's what it goes to. Well,
Yeah.
that couldn't be it. I'm just saying there are other things that can make light bend other than refraction. So
Oh yeah.
studying
Sure.
refraction is neat. However, that doesn't tell you which way the light's bending because it's never even been measured. So
No, I wasn't saying that's the only thing you care about. I just was using that as like an example of a complex and interesting and difficult scientific topic that gets engaged with a lot here. And I'm just saying I'm not accusing anyone on the flat
well,
Earth
I mean,
side
who's the
of
one that's
not.
confused though? Because I knew that studying refraction isn't going to tell you which way the light's bending, and it seemed like you thought it was gonna.
No, I just meant that as an example of a topic in science that comes up a lot here, just for the purpose of saying that I've never accused the flat Earth side of not um, uh, putting brain power to thinking about these things. I've never accused the flat Earth side of being lazy when it comes to studying up on these complicated topics in science. That I was just using it as a particular example of like
All right.
I'm sure there have been a lot of arguments where on a particular topic of fluid dynamics or light, the flat Earth side was winning for the purpose of that argument, that the Globers were saying something falsifiable and scientifically inaccurate on it.
All we do is win.
Well, you haven't convinced me of your ultimate conclusion, but you've convinced me that you're thinking hard on a lot of different topics and that there are individual topics that you've probably won many debates on.
Many, many, many.
And that's why I don't really engage a ton, though I listen in on it, on a lot of these topics that have to do with the atmosphere and specifically, because like I know I don't know a ton about it, and if I started to wade in on it a lot, I would just be speaking out my ass a lot of the time. So
I mean, dude, when it comes to the refraction and shit, there's nothing no one can do. Like the Globers don't know. You've never measured which way the lights. The thing is, the Globers come in and act like, oh, we know how refraction works, so we know how the light's bending. That is
yeah,
the most convoluted shit I've ever heard. Because even like I said, even in their own model, there's things that can bend light with that. That's not refraction. So who's that? Who's like saying wrong shit here? The guy who thinks refraction is going to tell you which way the light's bending, or the guy who knows that there's other things that can make light bend other than refraction? Who's winning that debate?
I think it sounds like you guys have often won debates about things related to refraction and fluid dynamics and stuff like that.
Newton was a
Sounds like
genius with fluid dynamics. I'm just saying, but
it
I mean,
sounds
he
like
got
a lot
things
of the
wrong,
globe
right?
earthers are out of their yeah. I mean, it sounds like a lot of the globe earthers are out of their depth or are misinformed or just making poor analyses and stuff, particularly on these topics. I don't
Well,
know.
I mean, do you know how many of them have said we know which way the light's bending because we know how refraction works? Do you know how many
I'm sure.
Globers have told me that personally?
I don't I can imagine. I don't doubt it. I listen to these conversations. I hear people saying stuff, and that's what I'm saying is that I'm not uh um yeah, I'm not saying that they're not confidently wrong about things potentially regularly. I mean, each person's different. Each person has a different amount of knowledge on different subjects, and everyone's capable of saying things that are false.
I mean, would you agree that if some guy came up to somebody and was like, "Hey, we know how refraction works, therefore we know which way the light's bending," would you agree they're right?
Um, I mean, it just in general, if someone came up to me and was like, "Hey, man, I know how refraction in the atmosphere works," I would, I don't know, I'd probably be doubtful that they had actually accounted for every single variable there is to properly understand this if it wasn't like the one thing that they were spending their entire life studying. Yeah.
Is it quicker east to west or quicker west to east?
Is what?
Journey time.
I don't know.
Because I seen like an AI overview and it said heading east is quicker. And then I looked at another thing and it said heading east is quicker. I thought it can't be right, surely.
I would
Because
assume that it's quicker to go west, but it's just a
you know
guess.
what I mean? You know what I mean? Like it's I obviously haven't looked at enough entries and stuff like that. Like last time I looked and thought I remembered it was the opposite. So I'm thinking to myself, so if you're going from, so I looked up Spain, like an equivalent sort of latitude, Spain to New York City, and it was saying a quicker journey coming home, but a difference of about 2 hours at its maximum and half an hour at its minimum.
Hmm.
So there's obviously like 1.5 sort of hours. But let's give or take a play of 500 miles an hour times 1.5. That's quite a few miles to play with. You know what I mean? But why would it? Well, why? If the Earth was facing the sun and rolling towards the sun, therefore we see the sun rise, then it would be going eastwards. As it's going eastwards, we're getting a quicker journey going eastwards. And I could model this so that the Earth is moving in the opposite direction and show you the effects.